On Christmas night, while her 3-week-old baby slept against her chest, Claire received a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of her husband, asleep in a Beverly Hills hotel bed, with another woman's hand resting on his bare chest. The message read, "He told me the baby was a mistake." But that text didn't destroy Claire. What destroyed her was what happened next. When Nathan rushed home and did something unforgivable inside a hospital room, with nurses watching and cameras rolling, he thought he could scare her into silence. He thought wrong, because the woman he slapped that night was not the same woman he married. She was someone far more dangerous. A mother with nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. What Claire did next didn't just end her marriage. It dismantled a man's entire empire, his career, his fortune, his reputation, piece by piece. And she did it all from a tiny apartment in Queens with a cracked kitchen counter and a second-hand piano. Lesson and meaning. This story carries one powerful truth. Choosing yourself when every voice around you says stay small is the bravest thing you will ever do. Your worth was never defined by who stayed or who left. It was always yours. If this story reminded you of your own strength, or someone you know who needs to hear this, leave a comment, share it with them, and hit subscribe so you never miss a story that could change a life. Christmas night, 11:47 in the evening. The apartment was so quiet that Claire Ellison Donovan could hear the Christmas tree lights buzzing softly in the living room, a faint electrical hum that had become the soundtrack of her loneliness. She sat in the oversized armchair near the window, the one Nathan picked out because it matched the minimalist aesthetic he demanded for every corner of their Upper East Side home. Against her chest, 3-week-old Elliot slept with the fierce determination of a newborn who had fought his way into the world 2 weeks early and intended to rest now that he had arrived. Claire had not eaten since noon. Her body ached in places she did not know could ache. The cesarean incision still pulled when she shifted too quickly, a sharp reminder that only 21 days ago, doctors had cut her open on an operating table, while Nathan sat in the waiting room, scrolling through emails on his phone. He had kissed her forehead, afterward, held Elliot for exactly 4 minutes, then excused himself to take a call from the office. 4 minutes. She counted. Now it was Christmas night, and Nathan was somewhere in Los Angeles handling what he called an emergency client meeting that could not wait until after the holidays. He had left that morning with a leather suitcase and a quick kiss pressed to the top of Elliot's head. "I will be back on the 26th, he had said, adjusting his coat in the hallway mirror. "Try to rest. You look exhausted." Not, "I am sorry I'm leaving you alone on Christmas." Not, "I wish I could stay." Just the observation that she looked exhausted, delivered in the same tone he used to point out a stain on the carpet. Claire watched him leave without arguing. She had stopped arguing months ago. Arguments required energy, and energy required hope, and hope required believing that the man walking out the door still cared whether she existed. The apartment stretched around her in expensive silence, 12 floors above Park Avenue, surrounded by curated artwork and chrome fixtures and a kitchen with appliances she never used because Nathan preferred ordering from the restaurant downstairs. Everything gleamed. Everything was perfectly placed. Everything felt like it belonged to someone else. Elliot stirred against her chest, his tiny mouth opening and closing in a dream. Claire pressed her lips to his forehead, breathing him in. He smelled like warmth and powder, and the one thing in her life that was entirely, undeniably real. Her phone buzzed on the marble coffee table. Claire glanced at it. Unknown number, probably a holiday spam message, one of those automated texts from a store she had shopped at once and never returned to. She considered ignoring it, She almost did. But something, call it instinct, call it the quiet voice that had been whispering warnings for months, made her reach for the phone. She opened the message. The words on the screen rearranged the shadowy architecture of her entire world in the span of a single breath. Merry Christmas, Claire. Your husband is lying next to me right now in Beverly Hills. He told me you don't sleep together anymore. He told me the baby was a mistake. I thought you should know, since he will never have the guts to tell you himself. S. Below the text, a photograph. Nathan asleep in a hotel bed, the sheets tangled around his waist, his face slack with the satisfied exhaustion of a man who had spent his evening doing something far removed from a client meeting. A woman's hand rested on his bare chest. Manicured nails painted a deep burgundy. In the background, partially visible on the pillow, the unmistakable logo of the Beverly Hills Hotel. Claire stared at the screen. The room tilted, not dramatically, not like in movies where the camera spins and the music swells. It tilted the way reality tilts when a truth you have been running from finally catches you, quietly, completely, with nowhere left to hide. She read the message again. He told me the baby was a mistake. She read it a third time. The baby was a mistake. Elliot shifted against her chest, his tiny fingers curling around the fabric of her shirt, as if sensing that something in the air had changed, that the heartbeat beneath his ear had gone from steady to erratic in the space between one breath and the next. Then a second message arrived from the same number. P.S. He is not coming back for you. He is already mine. The only question is how long you will keep pretending. A sound escaped Claire's throat. Not a scream, not a sob. Something between the two, something primal and broken and animal. The sound a person makes when the last wall they built around their pain finally collapses. Elliot began to cry. Claire held him tighter, her hands shaking so violently that she had to press him against her body to keep from dropping the phone. She read the messages one more time, as if repetition might change the words, might rearrange them into something less devastating, something she could dismiss or explain away or file under misunderstanding. But there was no misunderstanding. There was a photo. There was a name. There was a woman bold enough to text a recovering mother on Christmas night and sign her message with a single letter, as if her identity were a brand she wanted Claire to remember. St. Clair did not know who Saint was. Not yet, but she would. And when she did, the knowledge would change everything. She sat in the dim living room, Christmas lights blinking their soft, mechanical rhythm, her newborn crying against her chest, and she felt the ground beneath her life crack open like ice on a frozen river. Everything she had believed, everything she had endured, everything she had forgiven and overlooked and swallowed and excused, it all came crashing down in the glow of a single text message on Christmas night. The apartment had never felt so large or so empty. Claire stood slowly, Elliot pressed against her shoulder, and began to move through the rooms the way a person walks through a house after a storm, checking for damage, assessing what survived. The kitchen came first. She needed to make a bottle. Her hands still trembled, but the mechanical act of measuring formula and warming water gave her something to focus on, a small, physical task that kept the screaming inside her chest from spilling out. She looked at the stainless steel appliances, the marble countertops, the espresso machine that cost more than her first car. And standing there, bottle in hand, baby against her shoulder, she remembered their first apartment, a cramped one-bedroom in Brooklyn with a coffee maker that dripped if you did not hold the pot at exactly the right angle. Nathan in a wrinkled dress shirt, kissing her forehead before leaving for work, his briefcase held together with duct tape because he could not afford a new one yet. I do not need any of this fancy stuff, he had told her one morning, gesturing around the tiny kitchen with its mismatched mugs and second-hand toaster. I just need you. She believed him, God help her. She believed every word. That was 5 years ago. Before the promotions, before the glass office on Park Avenue, before Nathan decided that the woman who loved him through poverty was not polished enough for prosperity. Claire stared at the espresso machine. Nathan had not made her coffee in over a year. He had not made her anything. She moved to the living room, swaying gently to keep Elliot calm. The room was vast and spotless, every surface reflecting the Christmas lights in cold, perfect lines. She passed the spot near the window where her keyboard used to sit, the electric piano she had played every evening after teaching, the instrument that connected her to the music therapy program she dreamed of building. It was gone. Nathan moved it to a storage unit 4 months ago. It does not fit the space, he had said, scrolling through his phone without looking up. Not their home, not the living room. The space. As if the apartment were a showroom, and Claire's passions were clutter. She had not argued. By then, she had already learned that arguing with Nathan was like arguing with a wall that could talk back, a wall that made you feel small and irrational for wanting to hang something on it. The living room led to the nursery, the small corner of the apartment Claire had fought to create. Nathan called it the space, too. Never the baby's room, never Elliot's corner, just another section of his carefully curated world. Claire had decorated it herself, a soft gray crib, a mobile of paper stars, a rocking chair she found at a thrift store in Queens, and refinished by hand. Nathan complained that the chair did not match the aesthetic, but Claire held firm. It was the only battle she had won in months. She laid Elliot in the crib, watching his face relax as sleep reclaimed him. Her fingers brushed the small wooden rattle on the shelf beside the crib, a handmade thing she had bought at a Brooklyn street fair the day she found out she was pregnant. It was the first purchase she made for her child, before the ultrasound, before the name, before she knew whether she was carrying a boy or a girl. She just knew she was carrying hope. Standing in the nursery, Claire remembered the first pregnancy, 2 years ago, the one that ended in a hospital room at 3 a.m, Claire bleeding, terrified, calling Nathan's name. He arrived 4 hours later. 4 hours. He walked in smelling of whiskey, his collar slightly askew, and sat in the chair beside her bed with the expression of a man who had been interrupted during something more important. "These things happen," he said. "We will try again. No tears, no hand on her cheek, no, 'I am sorry,' no, 'Are you okay?' Just a sentence designed to close the conversation the way you close a file you no longer need." Claire cried alone in the bathroom that night, while Nathan slept soundly in the recliner, his phone face down on his chest, buzzing with messages he did not want her to see. When she got pregnant again, she let herself hope. She imagined Nathan softening, Nathan talking to her belly, Nathan assembling the crib with his sleeves rolled up, laughing at the instructions. She imagined rediscovering the man she married. Instead, he grew more distant. His phone was always locked. His nights grew later. His excuses grew thinner. And the scent of unfamiliar perfume on his collar, something floral and expensive, and nothing like the vanilla lotion Claire wore, became a regular presence she trained herself not to mention. She told herself it was stress. She told herself pregnancy made her emotional. She told herself that the tightness in her chest every time Nathan left for another dinner was anxiety, not intuition. She told herself lies because the truth was too heavy to carry alone, and she was already carrying so much. Claire left the nursery and paused in the hallway near the front door. Nathan's shoes were lined up on the rack, perfectly aligned, the way he insisted everything in his life be aligned, controlled, ordered, predictable. She looked at those shoes and remembered. 2 weeks ago, the holiday market near Rockefeller Center. Claire had gone alone because Nathan was at yet another meeting, and she wanted to feel something festive, something normal. She wandered through the stalls, 8 months pregnant, buying roasted chestnuts and watching families take photos in front of the enormous tree. That is when she saw them, Nathan and a woman, tall, dark-haired, stunning in a way that made Claire feel like a faded photograph standing next to a billboard. They walked through the crowd side by side, not touching, but close enough that the intimacy between them was unmistakable. The woman laughed at something Nathan said, touching his sleeve with a familiarity that stopped Claire's heart. She went home. She waited until Nathan arrived that evening, and she asked him directly, "Were you near Rockefeller Center today?" Nathan looked her dead in the eyes. His expression did not flicker. His voice did not waver. "No, you are imagining things. Pregnancy makes you paranoid, Claire. Honestly, I am worried about you." He said it with such steady conviction that Claire felt the ground shift beneath her certainty. Was she imagining things? Had she mistaken another man for Nathan? Was her mind playing tricks on her, the way he always said it did? She let it go. She swallowed the doubt and the hurt and the sick feeling in her stomach, and she let it go, because the alternative was accepting that the man she loved had looked her in the eyes and lied without blinking, and she was not ready for that truth. But now, standing in the hallway on Christmas night, with Sienna's text burning on her phone, every gaslit moment came crashing back at once. The locked phone, the late nights, the perfume, the Rockefeller sighting, the calm, controlled lies delivered with the precision of a man who had been practicing deception long before Claire ever suspected it. She was not crazy. She was never crazy. He was just that good at lying. Claire slid down the hallway wall until she was sitting on the cold hardwood floor, her back against the baseboard, her phone in her lap, the Christmas tree casting red and green shadows across her face. She read the texts one more time. "He told me the baby was a mistake. He is already mine. How long will you keep pretending?" Claire closed her eyes, and in the silence of that overpriced apartment, surrounded by everything Nathan had built to impress the world and nothing he had built to love her, she whispered a single word to herself: done. She was done. The decision to be done and the ability to act on it are two very different things, and Claire learned the difference in the space between midnight and dawn. After reading the texts, she sat on the bedroom floor with her back against the bed frame, Elliot sleeping peacefully in the crib, an arm's length away. The phone lay face up on the carpet beside her, Sienna's messages still glowing, the photograph of Nathan in a hotel bed still visible if she tilted her head. She wanted to scream. She wanted to pick up the crystal vase on the nightstand and hurl it against the wall that Nathan had insisted on painting a shade called Metropolitan Gray because it photographed well for his social media. She wanted to call every person she knew and tell them the truth, that Nathan Donovan, the man who smiled at charity events and talked about family values in board meetings, had been lying to everyone for months. But the baby was sleeping, and even in the worst moment of her life, Claire protected her son first. That instinct, fierce and primal and older than language, was the one thing Nathan had never been able to erode. She picked up her phone and called Nathan. It rang 4 times. He declined the call. She called again. This time it went straight to voicemail, that polished recording she had heard 100 times. "You have reached Nathan Donovan. Leave a message, and I will return your call at my earliest convenience." Earliest convenience. Even his voicemail sounded like a contract negotiation. Claire typed a text message. Her fingers were steady now, the shaking replaced by something colder, something still. I know about her. I know about everything. She sent it. The message showed as delivered, then read, then nothing. No response, no typing indicator, no frantic call back. Just silence. The kind of silence that tells you everything about where you rank in someone's priorities. 20 minutes passed. Claire sat in the dark, listening to the refrigerator hum in the kitchen, the radiator tick in the hallway, the soft, rhythmic breathing of her son. And then something inside her shifted. It was not a dramatic epiphany. There was no orchestra swell, no sudden burst of clarity accompanied by a motivational speech playing inside her head. It was quieter than that, deeper, like a bone that had been slowly fracturing for years, finally snapping clean. She was done protecting Nathan from the consequences of his choices. She was done translating his cruelty into something she could survive. She was done being the woman who stayed because staying felt safer than the terrifying unknown of leaving. She was just done. But before she could even begin to think about what done looked like in practical terms, before she could consider where she would go or what she would take or how she would survive, her body made a decision for her. The pain hit without warning, a sharp, tearing sensation across her lower abdomen, right along the line of her cesarean incision. Claire gasped and doubled forward, her hands flying to her stomach. The stitches were supposed to be healing. The doctor had told her to avoid stress, to rest, to let her body recover from major surgery. Instead, she had spent Christmas night alone with a newborn, discovering her husband's affair through a text from his mistress. Her blood pressure spiked. She could feel it in the pounding behind her eyes. The sudden tightness in her chest, the way the room blurred at the edges, as if the apartment itself were losing focus. She grabbed the edge of the crib to keep from falling sideways, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. Elliot stirred, his face scrunched. He began to whimper. Claire fumbled for her phone with fingers that had gone clumsy and cold. She needed help. She needed it now. Nathan was not going to answer. Nathan was 3,000 miles away in a hotel bed with another woman, and even if he were standing in the next room, she was not sure he would come. She scrolled through her contacts, her vision swimming, and stopped on a name, Dr. Warren Blake. Warren was not her doctor in the official sense. He was an emergency physician at New York Presbyterian, the same hospital where Elliot had been born. But before that, before the medical degree, and the white coat, and the steady hands that saved lives in the emergency room, Warren Blake had been a 15-year-old kid sitting in a plastic chair in a Brooklyn classroom, angry at the world and convinced that nothing would ever change. Claire had been his music therapist. She was fresh out of graduate school. 24 years old, assigned to an after-school program for at-risk teenagers. Warren was the kid who sat in the back and refused to participate, arms crossed, jaw tight, radiating the kind of hostility that most adults read as a threat, but Claire recognized as armor. She did not push him, she just played. Day after day she played piano in that classroom, and day after day Warren sat in the back and pretended not to listen. It took 3 weeks before he uncrossed his arms, 5 weeks before he spoke to her, 2 months before he told her, in a voice barely above a whisper, that his father had left and his mother worked 3 jobs, and he was pretty sure he was going to end up like every other kid on his block. Which is to say, nowhere. Claire looked at him and said, "You are not like every other kid on any block. You are Warren, and the world needs you to figure out what that means." It was not a profound statement. It was not the kind of thing they print on motivational posters. But it landed somewhere deep inside a boy who had never been told he mattered, and it stayed there, growing roots in soil that everyone else had written off as barren. Warren went to college, then medical school, then residency. He credited Claire in his graduation speech, called her the person who taught him that anger was not a destination. They stayed in loose contact over the years, a holiday card here, a congratulatory text there. When Claire had Elliot at New York Presbyterian, Warren was the one who checked on her every day, who remembered her favorite tea, who noticed that Nathan visited for exactly 20 minutes each time and spent 15 of those minutes on his phone. Warren never said anything about Nathan. He did not have to. The concern in his eyes spoke volumes. Now Claire pressed his name on her phone screen and prayed he would answer. He picked up on the second ring. "Claire?" His voice was alert, the kind of alert that comes from years of overnight emergency shifts. "What is happening?" "Something is wrong." Her voice came out fractured, words splitting apart like ice. "I cannot breathe. My heart is racing." The incision. "I am alone with the baby." There was a pause of approximately 1 second. She heard the sound of Warren standing up, heard something that might have been a chair scraping across a floor. "I am sending an ambulance to your address right now. Do not move. Keep Elliot close to you. Can you sit upright?" "I think so." "Good. Stay upright. It helps with breathing. I will meet you at the hospital. Claire, listen to me. You are going to be fine. Just stay on the line." She stayed. She pressed the phone to her ear and listened to Warren's steady voice, giving her breathing instructions while Elliot cried beside her, and the texts from Sienna glowed on the screen like evidence of a crime. The paramedics arrived 12 minutes later. 2 men and a woman, efficient and calm, their uniforms a jarring burst of color against the apartment's muted palette. They checked her vitals, stabilized her blood pressure, and loaded her and Elliot into the ambulance with the practiced gentleness of people who do this 20 times a day but never let it become routine. In the ambulance, under the fluorescent lights, Claire held Elliot against her chest and stared at the ceiling. She could hear the siren faintly through the walls, the sound muffled but persistent, cutting through the Christmas night silence of Manhattan. She thought about Nathan and Beverly Hills. She thought about the photo on her phone. She thought about the woman whose hand rested on her husband's chest, with the casual possessiveness of someone who had been there many times before. And she thought about herself, 32 years old, a mother of 21 days, a woman who grew up in foster care, with no family, no inheritance, no safety net, a woman who had built her entire adult life around a man who turned out to be a fiction. The ambulance rocked gently as it turned a corner. Elliot's crying softened to a whimper, then to silence. He fell asleep against her, trusting completely, unaware that the world his mother had constructed for him was collapsing in real time. At the hospital, Warren met her at the entrance. He was still in his scrubs from a shift that had ended 2 hours ago, his face tight with the controlled concern of a physician who knows how to keep his emotions clinical. He did not ask what happened. He walked beside her gurney, checked her vitals personally, spoke to the attending physician in the low, efficient tones of a colleague, requesting priority attention. Within 30 minutes, Claire was in a private room, blood pressure stabilized, an IV drip restoring fluids she had not realized she had lost. Warren sat in the chair beside her bed. Elliot slept in a hospital bassinet, swaddled tightly, his face peaceful. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hospital hummed around them. The ambient noise of machines and footsteps and distant voices, creating a kind of white noise that felt, paradoxically, more comforting than the silence of the apartment. Finally, Claire picked up her phone, opened the messages, and handed it to Warren without a word. He read the first text. His jaw tightened. He read the second text. A muscle twitched near his temple. He looked at the photograph for approximately 3 seconds. then set the phone down on the bedside table with the careful deliberation of a man placing a loaded weapon out of reach. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly. Claire looked at her son, looked at the hospital wristband on her arm, looked at the phone with Sienna's words still glowing in the dim room. "I want to disappear," she whispered. Warren nodded slowly, not in agreement with her plan, but in acknowledgement of her pain. He understood what she meant. Not vanish, not hide, disappear from the life that was killing her. "Then we will figure that out," he said. "But first, you rest. And Claire?" She looked at him. "You are not alone in this. Whatever you decide, you are not doing it alone." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that someone in this city, in this world, cared enough to show up not because they had to, but because they chose to. But belief was a luxury Claire had run out of hours ago, somewhere between the first text message and the ambulance ride. So she simply closed her eyes and let the exhaustion take her, Elliot's breathing the only lullaby she needed. Outside the hospital window, snow began to fall on Manhattan. Christmas night was ending, and with it, every lie Claire had told herself to survive. Claire did not know that Nathan was already on his way. She did not know that at approximately 2:15 in the morning, 3,000 miles away in a Beverly Hills hotel suite, Nathan Donovan had finally looked at his phone. He had been asleep when the texts arrived. Sienna lay beside him, her dark hair fanned across the pillow, one leg draped possessively over his. The suite smelled like expensive champagne, and the floral perfume Sienna wore, a scent Nathan had come to associate with a version of himself he preferred, the version that attended rooftop parties and closed deals over cocktails and never thought about the woman he left behind in New York. His phone sat on the marble nightstand, face down, the way Sienna liked it. No distractions, she always said, and Nathan always obeyed, because obeying Sienna felt like ambition, while obeying Claire had always felt like obligation. But sometime after 2 in the morning, Nathan woke with the uneasy feeling that people who are not used to having a conscience sometimes mistake for indigestion. He reached for his phone. The screen lit up with notifications. 3 missed calls from Claire. 1 text from Claire. "I know about her. I know about everything." Nathan's blood went cold. Not cold the way you feel when you step outside in winter. Cold the way you feel when you realize a door you thought was locked has been wide open the entire time. He sat up in bed. Sienna stirred beside him, mumbling something without opening her eyes. Nathan stared at Claire's message, reading it over and over, his mind racing through the implications. She knew. How did she know? Who told her? What exactly did she know? Was it the affair, or was it more? Did she know about the money, the hidden accounts, the expenses he had been diverting? His first instinct was not guilt. His first instinct was strategy. The same instinct that had carried him out of rural Ohio and into a corner office on Park Avenue. Assess the damage, control the narrative, neutralize the threat. He called Claire. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He texted her. "Claire, we need to talk. Call me back." Nothing. He called the apartment landline. It rang into the empty rooms of their Upper East Side home, echoing off marble and chrome, answered by no one. Nathan's strategic calm began to crack. Claire always answered. Claire was always there. That was the unspoken contract of their marriage. Nathan did whatever he wanted, and Claire waited. She always waited. But tonight, she was not waiting. He called Marcia Reeves, the retired judge who lived on the 9th floor, the neighbor Claire sometimes talked to in the elevator. Marcia's phone went straight to voicemail. Nathan's heartbeat accelerated. He stood up, pacing the hotel room in his boxers, phone pressed to his ear, trying Claire's number again and again. Sienna opened one eye. "What is wrong with you?" "Claire?" She is not answering. Sienna sighed, the kind of sigh a woman makes when she considers another woman's crisis to be an inconvenience. It is 3 in the morning there. She is probably asleep. She texted me. She knows. That got Sienna's attention. She sat up, the silk sheet falling to her waist, her expression shifting from sleepy annoyance to cool calculation. What does she know? Everything, apparently. She said she knows about you. Sienna was quiet for a moment. Then she shrugged. So she knows. It was going to come out eventually. This is not a business deal, Sienna. This is my wife. The wife you have been complaining about for 6 months? The wife you said was suffocating you? The wife you called emotionally draining? Sienna tilted her head, her voice smooth and clinical. Make up your mind, Nathan. You cannot have it both ways. But Nathan was already booking a flight. His fingers stabbed at his phone screen, finding a red-eye out of Los Angeles that would get him back to New York by 6 in the morning. He did not pack carefully. He shoved clothes into his suitcase, left his toiletries scattered across the bathroom counter, and walked out of the suite without kissing Sienna goodbye. She watched him leave with an expression that was not hurt, because Sienna Marlowe did not get hurt. It was amusement, the kind a chess player feels when an opponent makes a predictable move. Sienna picked up her own phone and looked at the texts she had sent to Claire hours earlier. She did not feel guilty. She felt satisfied. The messages were not impulsive, they were surgical. Sienna had spent 3 weeks composing them, choosing every word for maximum devastation, timing their delivery for Christmas night because she understood that betrayal hits hardest during the moments you are supposed to feel safest. This was not a woman scorned. This was a woman who had identified an obstacle and methodically set about removing it. Claire's existence offended Sienna on a fundamental level, not because Claire was competition, but because Sienna was the kind of person who could not share a stage with anyone, especially not the wife Nathan still, somewhere in the calcified remnants of his conscience, felt guilty about leaving. Guilt made Nathan unpredictable, and Sienna did not tolerate unpredictability. So she had sent the texts. Let Claire find out. Let the marriage implode. Let Nathan return to New York guilty and desperate and easier to control. Sienna set down her phone, pulled the covers to her chin, and went back to sleep. Nathan landed at JFK at 5:52 in the morning on December 26th. He did not stop for coffee. He did not check his luggage at the carousel. He walked straight to the taxi line with his carry-on and gave the driver his address on the Upper East Side with the clipped urgency of a man accustomed to having his demands met immediately. The city was still sleeping off Christmas, streets empty except for early morning joggers and delivery trucks. The sky was gray and heavy, threatening snow but not delivering. Nathan arrived at the apartment building at 6:24. He took the elevator to the 12th floor, his heart pounding with a feeling he did not immediately recognize, because it had been so long since he had experienced it. Fear. Not the productive fear that drives ambition, but the raw, animal fear of a man who senses that the foundation beneath his carefully constructed life has shifted. He unlocked the apartment door and stepped inside. Silence. Total, absolute silence. The Christmas tree lights were still blinking, their cheerful rhythm now grotesque in the empty room. The apartment was cold, as if someone had left a window open, though none were open. It was the cold of absence, the temperature a space drops to when the person who made it warm has left. "Claire!" Nathan called, his voice echoing off marble. "Claire, are you here?" No answer. He walked through the rooms quickly. Kitchen, empty. Living room, empty. Bedroom, bed unmade. Claire's side, clearly slept in recently. Nursery. Nathan stopped in the doorway of the nursery. The crib was empty. The rocking chair was in its usual spot. But Elliot's blanket was gone. The diaper bag was gone. The small suitcase Claire kept packed in the closet, the one she called her hospital bag in case of emergencies, was gone. Claire was gone. The baby was gone. Nathan stood in the empty nursery, and for the first time in years, the mask he wore every day, the confident, controlled, strategic mask of a man who had everything figured out, slipped. He pulled out his phone and began calling hospitals. He did not know why that was his first instinct, except that somewhere beneath the layers of selfishness and self-preservation, some buried fragment of the man he used to be remembered that Claire had been recovering from surgery, that she was alone, that something could have gone wrong. On his fourth call, he found her. New York Presbyterian, admitted the night before for stress-induced hypertension. Patient and infant stable. Nathan was in a taxi within 3 minutes. He arrived at the hospital at 7:15, unshaven, still wearing the clothes he had traveled in, his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless red-eye flight. He pushed through the entrance, flashed his identification at the front desk, and demanded to see his wife. A nurse led him down a corridor, her expression neutral in the way hospital staff are trained to remain neutral around agitated family members. She stopped at a door on the 3rd floor. "Your wife is resting. The baby is with her." Nathan did not wait for permission. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. Claire was sitting up in the hospital bed, Elliot sleeping in a bassinet beside her. She looked exactly the way Sienna's texts should have made a husband feel, exhausted, pale, her eyes red-rimmed, her hospital gown loose around shoulders that seemed smaller than he remembered. A wristband circled her left wrist. Her name and the date, Christmas night, printed in clinical black ink. She looked at him, not with relief, not with anger, with the flat, tired gaze of a woman who had expected him to show up eventually and had already decided it did not matter. "What the hell are you doing here?" Nathan hissed, closing the door behind him. "Why did you not answer my calls?" Claire's voice was surprisingly steady. "I know about Sienna, Nathan." The name landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. Nathan's face performed a rapid series of expressions: panic, calculation, denial, resolution, before settling on the one he wore best: outraged innocence. "Who told you that? Who has been filling your head with this?" "She told me herself," Claire said quietly. "She texted me with a photo of you in her bed. On Christmas night." Nathan froze. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. For a man who had built his career on always having the right words, he suddenly had none. Then the training kicked in, the same reflexive self-preservation that had gotten him out of Ohio, through an Ivy League MBA and into the upper floors of Manhattan finance. "She is lying," he said, his voice dropping into the measured, reasonable register that had worked on Claire for years. "She is obsessed with me. I rejected her advances, and she is trying to destroy our family out of spite. This is exactly what someone like her would do." Claire shook her head slowly. "I saw you at Rockefeller Center, Nathan. 2 weeks ago. You were with her. I asked you about it, and you told me I was imagining things. You told me pregnancy was making me paranoid. You were paranoid. You are paranoid. Claire, listen to yourself. You just had a baby. Your hormones are going haywire. Your mind is not working properly right now, and someone is taking advantage of that." He took a step toward her, his expression softening into what he believed was compassion, but Claire now recognized as performance. "Stop." Her voice was quiet, but the word carried a weight that halted Nathan mid-step. "I am not doing this anymore." Something in Nathan's carefully maintained composure began to fracture. Not the composure he showed the world, the polished, charming, unshakable exterior of a successful man. The deeper composure, the one that kept the scared, furious boy from Ohio, locked in a room where no one could see him. Claire was refusing to play her role. Claire was not crying, not begging, not asking him to explain. Claire was sitting in that hospital bed with their newborn son beside her and looking at him with eyes that held no fear and no love and no anger, just a calm, devastating certainty that she was finished. And Nathan Donovan could not handle a woman who was not afraid of him. "You do not get to leave me," he growled, his voice losing its measured control, the Ohio accent he had spent years scrubbing away, creeping back in around the edges. "You do not get to take my son and just disappear." "I did not disappear, Nathan. I ended up in a hospital because you were not here." He grabbed her arm, hard, his fingers dug into the soft flesh above her elbow, yanking her toward him with a force that startled them both. "Let go of me," Claire said. "We are going to talk about this," Nathan snarled. "You are going to listen to me. You owe me that. I do not owe you anything." Something snapped. Not a thought, not a decision. Something deeper and uglier. Something that lived in the part of Nathan he had spent his whole life denying. The part that watched his father slam cabinet doors when the bills piled up. The part that learned, long before he ever put on a suit, that power means never letting someone else have the last word. His hand swung. Open palm. Reflex. Rage. His hand connected with the side of Claire's face, with a crack that split the room in two. The sound was like a gunshot in the small hospital room. Claire's head snapped sideways. Elliot woke up screaming, his tiny voice piercing the silence with a cry that seemed to come from the center of the earth. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nathan stared at his own hand. His fingers were still spread wide, still vibrating with the impact. He looked at that hand as if it belonged to someone else, as if some stranger had reached across his body and done the thing he would spend the rest of his life pretending did not happen. "Claire," he stammered, "I did not mean to. That was not. I would never." But Claire was not listening. She touched her cheek, feeling the heat radiate outward from the point of impact, and looked up at her husband with an expression that froze the words in his throat. There was no fear in her eyes. There was no hurt. There was no love. There was something far more dangerous. Certainty. "Get out," she said. The door opened. A nurse stood in the doorway, her face rigid with controlled alarm. Behind her, drawn by the commotion, Warren Blake appeared, still in his scrubs, his expression hardening the instant he saw Claire's reddened cheek and Nathan standing over her with his hands shaking. Warren stepped into the room and positioned himself between Nathan and the bed. Not aggressively, not with clenched fists or raised voice. He simply stood there, 6 feet of quiet, immovable presence. A wall that Nathan would have to physically move through to reach Claire again. "You need to leave," Warren said. "Now." "This is none of your business," Nathan spat. "Security is already on the way. You can walk out, or you can be escorted. Choose." Nathan's eyes darted between Warren, Claire, the nurse, the crying baby. The room was closing in on him. The walls he had built, the narrative he controlled, the image he projected, all of it was crumbling in real time, in front of witnesses, in a place with cameras and incident reports and nurses who would document everything. He had hit his wife, in a hospital, in front of their newborn son, in front of a doctor and a nurse who would file a report before the hour was over. Nathan Donovan, the man who never made mistakes, had just made the most catastrophic one of his life. He stumbled backward. Security arrived, 2 large men in dark uniforms, who took Nathan by each arm with the practiced efficiency of people who had removed dangerous family members from hospital rooms before. As they led him down the corridor, Nathan looked over his shoulder one last time. Through the closing door, he caught a glimpse of Claire, sitting upright in the hospital bed. Elliot clutched against her chest, one hand still pressed to her burning cheek. She was not crying. That terrified him more than anything. Claire sat in the silence that followed Nathan's removal. The nurse checked her vitals, gently examined her cheek, and asked whether she wanted to file a report. Claire nodded. The nurse made notes, her pen moving across the form with the grim efficiency of someone who had filled out too many of these in her career. Warren stood near the window, giving Claire space, but not leaving. "I should not have let him in," the nurse said quietly, almost to herself. "I should have asked more questions." "You could not have known," Warren told her. "That is the problem with men like him. They always look like the kind of person you should trust." After the nurse left, Warren pulled the chair closer to Claire's bed and sat down. "The incident report is filed. Security has his name. If he comes back, they will call the police." Claire nodded. She was staring at her hands in her lap. The left one still cradled Elliot, the right one trembled faintly. "He hit me," she said, as if hearing it out loud would make it either more or less real. "Yes, in front of our son." "Yes." "In a hospital." "Yes." Claire exhaled. It was not a sigh. It was the sound of something final being acknowledged, a door closing that would never reopen. "I need to leave, Warren. Not just the hospital, everything. The apartment, the marriage, all of it. I need to take Elliot and go somewhere he can never find us." Warren was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression the careful blend of concern and respect that separated a good doctor from a great one. "I know someone who can help you with that. But Claire, you need to understand something first. What happened in this room tonight, the assault, the witnesses, the hospital record, that is not just pain. That is evidence. And evidence is power." Claire looked at him. "Power," she repeated, as if the word were a language she had forgotten how to speak. "You are not helpless. I know it feels that way right now, but you have more leverage than you think. You just need the right people in your corner." Claire wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the worst night of her life had given her something other than a bruised cheek and a shattered marriage. But belief, as she had learned, takes time. And right now, all she had was survival. "Help me get out of here," she whispered. "Please." "I will," Warren said. "I promise." Outside, the snow that had been threatening all night finally began to fall, covering Manhattan in a thin, white layer that made everything look clean and new. A lie, of course. The city beneath was exactly as dirty and complicated as it had always been. But for a few hours, at least, the world pretended to start over. Claire wished she could do the same. She would. But first, she had to escape. Claire was discharged from the hospital the following morning, December 26th at 9:14. Warren arranged a private exit through the staff corridor on the ground floor to avoid the main lobby, where Nathan might be waiting, watching, calculating his next move. The corridor smelled like antiseptic and industrial floor cleaner, the universal scent of hospitals that Claire had grown to associate with both her greatest fear and her newborn son. She walked slowly, Elliot strapped against her chest in the carrier she had brought in the ambulance, her overnight bag slung over one shoulder. Every step pulled at her incision, a reminder that her body had been through 2 traumas in 3 weeks and was running on willpower alone. At the end of the corridor, a door opened onto a small parking area reserved for staff. A gray Toyota Camry idled near the curb, Behind the wheel sat Marcia Reeves. Marcia was 58 years old, compact and deliberate in the way that people become after spending 3 decades making decisions that altered families. She had been a family court judge in Manhattan for 30 years before retiring, and in that time, she had watched more marriages collapse than most people witness in a lifetime. She knew the patterns. She recognized the signs. And she had been watching Nathan Donovan since the day he and Claire moved into the 12th floor of her building, observing with the quiet, patient attention of a woman who had seen it all and was waiting for the moment when her experience would be needed. That moment had arrived. Claire opened the passenger door and lowered herself into the seat, wincing. Marcia took one look at the fading red mark on Claire's left cheek and said nothing for a full minute. She gripped the steering wheel. She breathed in, she breathed out. The silence was not passive. It was the silence of a woman marshaling 30 years of professional fury into something useful. Then Marcia spoke. I spent 3 decades in family court, watching men like him destroy women like you, charming men, successful men, men who wear their violence on the inside, where no one can see it, until one day they cannot keep it hidden anymore. She shifted the car into drive. You are done waiting, Claire. We are done being gentle. Claire did not argue. She did not have the energy. She leaned her head against the window and watched Manhattan slide past, the holiday decorations still clinging to storefronts, the sidewalks dusted with last night's snow, the whole city moving forward as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But something extraordinary had happened. On Christmas night, in a hospital room on the Upper East Side, a woman who had spent years making herself small had finally decided to take up space. Marcia drove across the Queensboro Bridge in silence. The skyline shrank in the rearview mirror. The neighborhoods changed. Brownstones to brick apartments, boutiques to bodegas. The curated perfection of the Upper East Side giving way to the messy, genuine, unapologetic reality of Queens. They arrived at a modest 2-bedroom apartment on a tree-lined side street. The building was 4 stories, old but solid, with a fire escape zigzagging up the brick facade and window boxes that someone had planted with winter herbs. It was owned by a domestic violence advocacy network Marcia had connections with, a safe house that existed off the radar, its address known only to the people who needed it and the people who protected them. Marcia parked, walked around to open Claire's door, carried the overnight bag up the stairs while Claire climbed slowly with Elliot against her chest. The apartment smelled like laundry detergent and old coffee. The paint on the window frames was peeling. The radiator ticked like a mechanical heartbeat. The kitchen counter had a crack running through the middle, and the living room couch sagged in a way that suggested many people had sat on it before, each one arriving with their own version of the same story. Nothing about the apartment was beautiful, but when Claire sat down on that sagging couch with Elliot warm against her chest, she felt something she had not felt in so long that she almost did not recognize it. Safe. Not safe the way Nathan's apartment had been safe. Behind security cameras and doormen and 12 floors of glass and steel. That was the safety of a cage. This was different. This was the safety of a place that expected nothing from her, that did not require her to perform or shrink or pretend. A place that simply said, "You are here. That is enough." Elliot stirred and opened his eyes, blinking at the unfamiliar ceiling. Claire adjusted his blanket and whispered, "We made it, baby. We are out." Marcia brought her a mug of chamomile tea and set it on the cracked kitchen counter. "You rest tonight. Tomorrow, we plan." But before Claire left the Upper East Side apartment, before the ambulance and the hospital and the gray Toyota, She had done something deliberate. In the early hours of Christmas night, after the texts and before the collapse, while Elliot slept and the apartment hummed with expensive silence, Claire had made preparations. She gathered the few things that mattered to her, not the designer dresses Nathan insisted she wear to events, not the jewelry, except for one piece, not the shoes or the handbags or the cashmere throws that decorated a life she never chose. She took the baby's essentials: formula, diapers, the soft blanket she had knitted during the pregnancy, 3 outfits, the wooden rattle from the Brooklyn Street Fair. She took her documents: birth certificate, social security card, Elliot's hospital records. She took her mother's silver locket, the one keepsake from a woman she barely remembered, the only evidence that she had once belonged to someone before Nathan. And she took one diamond earring. The earrings were Cartier, a matched pair Nathan had given her on their first anniversary. "These will make you look less ordinary," he had said, presenting them with the smug generosity of a man who believed gifts could replace tenderness. Claire had worn them to every event, every dinner, every performance of the dutiful wife Nathan required. They were beautiful and cold and carried the weight of everything she had become in his shadow. She opened the velvet box on the dresser, 2 earrings inside, identical, glinting in the dim light. She took one and placed it in her bag. The other she left in the box. Then she sat at the small writing desk Nathan never used because all of his communication was digital, and she wrote a letter. Her handwriting was steady, steadier than she felt. The pen moved across the paper with the careful deliberation of a woman choosing her last words to a man who never listened to any of the others. She did not accuse, she did not beg, she did not dramatize or exaggerate or bend the truth to make herself sound more sympathetic. She simply wrote what was real. She wrote about seeing him at Rockefeller Center and being told she was imagining things. She wrote about the months of locked phones and late nights and perfume that was not hers. She wrote about the miscarriage and how he arrived 4 hours late and said, "These things happen." She wrote about the keyboard he hid and the dreams he dismissed and the voice he slowly, methodically convinced her she did not have. She wrote about Christmas night, about the texts, about the photo, about calling his phone and hearing it ring and ring and ring into the expensive silence of a Beverly Hills hotel room where he lay next to another woman. And she wrote about Elliot, about the child she had wanted so desperately, the child she had feared she would never have, the child Nathan called a mistake to the woman he was sleeping with. The letter filled 2 pages. The last line was the one she spent the longest composing, because she wanted it to say everything and nothing, to be the kind of sentence that stays in a person's mind long after the paper is folded. "I will not raise our son in a home where his mother is invisible. I hope one day you become the man you pretend to be." She folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, and placed it on the marble coffee table beside the open Cartier box, with the single remaining earring. Then she removed the hospital wristband from her wrist, the one from the emergency visit earlier that night, the one printed with her name and the date, and she laid it on the floor near the sofa, where Nathan would see it when he walked in. 3 objects: 1 earring, 1 letter, 1 wristband, a matched pair, broken, a truth finally spoken, a reminder of the night he chose someone else. Claire stood in the hallway of the apartment for the last time. She looked at Nathan's shoes, still lined up perfectly on the rack. She looked at the Christmas tree, still blinking its mechanical cheerfulness into the empty room. She looked at the marble and chrome and glass, all the surfaces Nathan had chosen, because they photographed well, because they projected success, because they made him feel like the man he wanted the world to believe he was. Then she walked out and closed the door behind her, not with a slam, just a quiet click, the sound of a chapter ending. Nathan found the apartment empty at 6:24 on the morning of December 26th. By 7:15, he had located Claire at the hospital. By 7:40, he had been escorted out by security with a red mark on his wife's cheek as evidence of the man he truly was. He returned to the apartment at 8:30, still reeling, still furious, still convinced that this was somehow Claire's fault. He shoved open the door and stood in the living room, breathing hard, his mind racing through contingencies. That is when he noticed. The Christmas tree, still blinking, the apartment, perfectly intact, except for the absence of a woman and a baby. And on the marble coffee table, 3 objects arranged with a precision that made his stomach drop. The Cartier box, open, 1 earring inside. Its match, gone. The envelope, his name written in Claire's careful handwriting, and on the floor near the sofa, the hospital wristband, Claire's name, Christmas night, emergency department. Nathan picked up the wristband first. His fingers were numb. He read the date. He read the department. He understood, in a rush that nearly buckled his knees, that while he was in Beverly Hills with Sienna, while he was drinking champagne and ignoring calls and choosing comfort over conscience, his wife had been in an emergency room. He had ignored her calls. She was calling from a crisis, and he sent her to voicemail. He opened the letter with hands that trembled for the first time since he was a child. He read it standing up, unable to sit, unable to breathe properly. The words on the page, performing the one task Claire had always done better than anyone. Telling the truth, he read the last line 3 times. I will not raise our son in a home where his mother is invisible. I hope one day you become the man you pretend to be. Nathan set the letter down. He looked around the apartment. The gleaming surfaces, the perfect furniture, the view of Park Avenue through floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything he had fought for, everything he had clawed his way toward since leaving that cramped house in Ohio, all of it was exactly the same. And all of it meant nothing. Because the one person who had loved him without conditions, who had married him when he had nothing and stayed while he acquired everything, who had carried his child and endured his contempt and still, against all logic, hoped he might change, that person was gone. And she had taken the only thing in the apartment that mattered. Nathan stood alone in his beautiful, empty home, and for the first time since he was a boy, he felt the thing he had spent his entire adult life running from. Small. The first 48 hours in Queens were the hardest Claire had ever lived through, and she had lived through quite a lot. She barely slept. Elliot needed feeding every 3 hours, a relentless cycle of hunger and warmth and burping and changing that left no room for the kind of rest her body desperately required. Between feedings, she lay on the sagging couch in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a building that was not her own, buses rumbling outside, a dog barking 2 floors down, the radiator performing its rhythmic ticking. She had nothing. The reality of that word settled over her like a physical weight. No money, because Nathan had controlled all of their finances since the first year of marriage, gradually moving her name off accounts and credit cards with the patient. Methodical efficiency of a man who planned his traps years in advance. No job, because Nathan had encouraged her to leave teaching after his promotion, framing it as a gift rather than what it was, the removal of her independence. No family, because she had grown up in foster care, and the only person she called family was asleep in a crib beside her. She had Elliot, she had her documents, she had her mother's silver locket, and 1 diamond earring, and a phone full of screenshots that proved her husband was a liar. On the second day, Marcia sat her down at the cracked kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and a legal pad. Sweetheart, Marcia said, her voice carrying the weight of 30 years of courtroom authority, I need you to hear me clearly. You are not just a woman going through a divorce. You are a woman with documented evidence of domestic violence, financial abuse, and spousal abandonment. I saw 1,000 cases like yours in my courtroom, and the women who won were the ones who fought smart and fought early, the ones who waited, who hoped their husbands would change, who believed that love was enough. Those are the ones I watched lose everything. Claire stared at the coffee she had not touched. She had to. I do not even have a lawyer. You do now. Marcia pulled a business card from her pocket and set it on the table. The name embossed in clean black type read, Diana Castillo, Attorney at Law, Family and Matrimonial Division. Diana is the best divorce attorney in Manhattan, Marcia said. She does not do sympathy. She does not do hand-holding. She does strategy. And right now, Claire, strategy is what you need more than comfort. Diana Castillo arrived at the Queen's apartment the following afternoon. She was 44 years old, compact, sharp-eyed, and dressed in a charcoal blazer that looked like it had been pressed by someone who understood the psychological power of crisp lines. She carried a leather briefcase and an expression that suggested she had already formed opinions about Claire's case and was simply waiting for the evidence to confirm them. She sat at the kitchen table, accepted coffee, and opened the briefcase. Tell me everything. Claire told her. The gaslighting, the financial control, the months of psychological manipulation, the affair, the texts from Sienna, the hospital visit, the slap. Diana listened without interrupting. She took no notes. When Claire finished, Diana opened a folder and laid out documents she had already prepared. I pulled the hospital incident report this morning. The nurse who witnessed the assault provided a written statement. The security camera in the hallway captured Nathan entering and leaving your room, and the timestamp matches the report. Claire stared at her. How did you get all of this already? Diana glanced at Marcia. Marcia sipped her coffee and said nothing. Marcia called me the night you were admitted, Diana explained. I have been working since then. By the time you and I are done talking today, I will have filed the following: a divorce petition, an emergency order of protection, a petition for temporary full custody of your son, and a motion to freeze all of Nathan's personal and joint accounts pending financial discovery. Claire's breath caught. You can do all of that? Diana's expression did not soften, but her voice dropped half a register. He hit you in a hospital, in front of a nurse, with a newborn in the room. He financially isolated you for years. He abandoned you on Christmas while you were recovering from surgery, and his mistress has been directly harassing you. She closed the folder. This is not a divorce case, Claire. This is a demolition. For the first time since Christmas night, Claire felt something besides exhaustion and grief. She felt the faintest stirring of what she could only describe as possibility. Not hope exactly. Hope was still too expensive, too fragile, too likely to be snatched away. But possibility, the sense that the walls closing around her might have a door she had not yet noticed, that was enough to keep breathing. Diana stood, buttoned her blazer, and picked up her briefcase. I will be in touch within 48 hours with confirmation of all filings. In the meantime, do not contact Nathan. Do not respond to anything he sends. Do not post anything on social media, and do not leave this apartment without telling Marcia first. She paused at the door. One more thing. The screenshots of those texts from Sienna. Save them in 3 places. Email them to me, email them to yourself, and store them on a cloud drive. Evidence disappears. People disappear. Screenshots do not, unless you let them. After Diana left, Marcia refilled Claire's coffee and sat back down. How do you feel? Claire considered the question. An honest answer would have taken an hour and covered territory ranging from terror to exhaustion to a strange, unfamiliar sensation that might have been the beginning of anger. Anger she had not allowed herself in years. Anger that Nathan had trained out of her, the way you train a dog, not to bark, by punishing it every time it makes a sound. I feel like someone just told me I am allowed to fight back, Claire said. Marcia reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You were always allowed, sweetheart. You just needed someone to remind you. Things began to move quickly. Within a week, Diana had secured the emergency order of protection. A judge reviewed the hospital incident report, the nurse's statement, the security footage, and the text messages from Sienna, and issued an order prohibiting Nathan from contacting Claire or coming within 500 feet of her or Elliot. The order was delivered to Nathan at his office, hand-delivered by a process server who found him in the lobby of Steele and Kessler Capital in front of 3 colleagues. Nathan read the document standing in the lobby, his face draining of color, while 2 analysts and an associate pretended not to watch. The process server left. Nathan stood there, holding the paper, his jaw working, his eyes scanning the legal language that told him, in the coldest possible terms, that his wife had obtained the power of the court to keep him away from his own son. Diana's forensic accountant went to work next. Her name was Patricia, a 51-year-old woman with reading glasses and the relentless attention to detail of someone who found other people's financial secrets genuinely fascinating. Within 2 weeks, Patricia had uncovered what Claire had suspected, but could never prove. Nathan had been systematically diverting marital income into private investment accounts for 3 years. Over $400,000, quietly siphoned from joint accounts and rerouted into vehicles Claire had never been told about. The judge froze everything: Nathan's accounts, his investment portfolio, his access to the shared assets he had been quietly emptying for years. In a single court order, the financial control Nathan had spent years building was stripped away. Diana delivered the news to Claire over the phone. He cannot touch a dime without a judge's approval. The money is locked. Claire sat on the floor of the Queen's apartment, Elliot in her lap, the phone pressed to her ear. $400,000, she repeated. He hid $400,000 from me. At least, Patricia thinks there may be more. We are still digging. Nathan was served the divorce papers 2 days later, again at his office, again in the lobby, again in front of colleagues. This time, a photographer from the New York Ledger happened to be in the building covering an unrelated financial story and snapped a picture of Nathan holding the envelope, his face a study in barely contained fury. The image ran, in the next day's edition, under the headline, Steele and Kessler Executive, Served Divorce Papers in Office Lobby. It was not front-page news, but it was enough to start conversations, enough to send ripples through the professional network Nathan had spent years cultivating. His image, the one thing he valued above all else, was beginning to crack. While the legal machinery ground forward, something quieter and perhaps more important was happening inside the apartment in Queens. Warren Blake visited on a Tuesday afternoon, carrying a folder and a cup of chamomile tea from the cafe on the corner. He sat across from Claire at the kitchen table, where Elliot slept and a bouncer between them, and opened the folder. Inside was a proposal for a city-funded program integrating music therapy into public elementary schools. Warren had been asked to lead the wellness division of the initiative, a collaboration between the city's Department of Education and several hospital systems. He needed a curriculum designer, someone with both musical training and classroom experience. I have been looking for someone with your exact background for 6 months, Warren said. A music therapist who has actually worked with children in real classrooms, not someone with a theory, someone who has done it. Claire stared at the proposal. The words swam on the page, not because of tears, but because the idea that someone was offering her a professional future felt so foreign she could not immediately process it. This is not charity, Warren added firmly, reading her expression. I did not create this position for you. It existed before I knew you needed it. I just happened to know the most qualified person for the job. Claire shook her head. I cannot think about work right now. I can barely think about tomorrow. Warren leaned forward. Then do not think about it as work. Think about it as proof that your life did not end when you walked out that door. She took the folder. She read the proposal that night after Elliot's midnight feeding, sitting cross-legged on the couch with a single lamp, casting warm light across the pages. The program was ambitious, thoughtful, and exactly the kind of work she had dreamed of doing before Nathan convinced her that her dreams did not fit his space. Something inside her flickered, an old spark, buried under years of contempt and dismissal and the slow, systematic erosion of her identity. It was not a flame, not yet. It was more like a pilot light that had been turned down so low she had forgotten it existed, but it was still there. 3 days later, she called Warren and accepted the position. When do I start? She asked. Whenever you are ready, he said. Claire looked at Elliot, sleeping peacefully in his crib, his tiny fingers curled around the edge of his blanket. She looked at the proposal on the table. She looked at the cracked kitchen counter and the peeling paint and the sagging couch that had held so many women before her, each one arriving broken and each one leaving stronger. I am ready, she said, and for the first time since Christmas night, she believed it. The following week, Claire took Elliot for his first walk outside in the stroller Marcia had borrowed from the Advocacy Network. Queens was loud and messy and alive, the absolute opposite of the Upper East Side's curated silence. A woman at the bodega on the corner smiled at Elliot and said, "Beautiful boy." A kid on a bicycle rang his bell as he passed and waved. A man carrying groceries held the door for Claire without looking at his phone, without checking whether she was the kind of person worth holding a door for. He just held it. Normal life, ordinary life, the kind of life Nathan had taught her to look down on, and the kind of life she realized she had been starving for. Claire stood on the sidewalk, sunlight warming her face, Elliot blinking at the world from his stroller, and she cried. Not the desperate, shaking shibboleth of a woman falling apart. These were different. These were the tears you cry when a pressure you did not know you were carrying finally releases. When you step outside a building you thought was your home and realize it was your prison, and the whole world is bigger and kinder and more available to you than you were ever allowed to believe. She wiped her eyes, adjusted Elliot's blanket, and kept walking. For the first time in years, Claire Ellison was not surviving. She was beginning to live. But Nathan Donovan was not finished with her, not by a long distance. And the 3 catastrophes heading her way would test every ounce of the strength she was only beginning to rediscover. And now, if you have ever been in a moment where you finally thought the worst was over, where you allowed yourself to exhale and believe that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay, then you know what comes next. Because life has a way of waiting until you lower your guard before it hits you the hardest. Claire was about to learn that lesson 3 times in a row. The first catastrophe arrived in the form of a legal document. Nathan, upon receiving the divorce papers and the protective order and the news that his accounts had been frozen, did what men like Nathan always do when they lose control. He did not reflect. He did not apologize. He hired the most aggressive weapon money could buy. Bradley Cross was not just a family law attorney. He was a specialist in a very particular kind of warfare, the kind waged in courtrooms against women who dared to leave powerful men. His reputation preceded him through the Manhattan legal community like a weather warning. He charged $900 an hour, he never lost, and his strategy was always the same: make the mother look unstable, make the father look concerned, and let the court system do the rest. Cross filed an emergency motion within 72 hours of being retained. The filing claimed that Claire Ellison Donovan was emotionally unstable and potentially a danger to her child. The evidence, and Cross was very good at constructing evidence from ordinary facts, included Claire's multiple hospital visits during pregnancy, her documented history of anxiety, the fact that she had fled the marital home with a newborn to an undisclosed location, and a sworn statement from Nathan claiming that Claire had exhibited erratic behavior in the weeks leading up to Christmas. Cross also requested an emergency custody evaluation, a process in which a court-appointed psychologist would interview Claire, visit her living situation, and assess whether she was fit to retain custody of Elliot. Diana called Claire with the news on a Wednesday morning. Claire was sitting on the floor of the Queen's apartment, Elliot in her lap, going through the music therapy proposal Warren had given her. He filed for what? Claire's voice went thin. An emergency custody evaluation. His attorney is arguing that you are mentally unstable and that you kidnapped Elliot by taking him to an undisclosed location. I did not kidnap my own baby. I left a domestic violence situation. I know that. The judge knows that. But Cross is very good at making reasonable actions look suspicious. We will fight it, and we will win it. But you need to prepare for a psychologist to come to your apartment, interview you, and file a report with the court. Claire hung up. She looked at Elliot, his tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb, holding on with the unconscious trust of a child who has no concept of custody battles or court orders or the terrible things adults do to each other in the name of control. He is trying to take my baby, Claire whispered. The words hung in the air of the small apartment, and for a moment, the safety she had felt within these walls evaporated. The peeling paint and the ticking radiator and the sagging couch were no longer a refuge. They were the setting for a new battle, one she could not afford to lose. The second catastrophe came 2 days later. A knock at the door. Not a friendly knock. Not Marcia's gentle tap or Warren's two-knuckle signal. This was an official knock, the kind made by someone carrying a clipboard and a mandate. Claire opened the door, holding Elliot against her chest. On the other side stood a woman in a navy blazer with an identification badge clipped to her lapel. Department of Children and Family Services. Mrs. Donovan? It is Ellison, Claire Ellison. Ms. Ellison, I am conducting a welfare check following a report filed with our office. May I come in? Claire's blood went cold. A CPS investigation. Someone had called Child Protective Services and reported her. She stepped aside, because she had no legal choice, and watched as the caseworker moved through the apartment with methodical efficiency. The kitchen, the bathroom, the bedroom, the crib. She checked the refrigerator, noted the formula and baby food. She examined the sleeping area, the temperature of the room, the cleanliness of the surfaces. Claire answered every question truthfully, her voice steady, even as terror screamed behind her ribs. Yes, she was receiving medical care. Yes, Elliot had a pediatrician. Yes, she had a support network. No, she was not using substances. No, she was not being supported by a man. She was starting a new job. She was rebuilding. The caseworker wrote notes. Lots of notes. She did not smile. She did not reassure. She simply observed and documented, the way a scientist examines a specimen, clinical and thorough, and absolutely devoid of warmth. After 45 minutes, the caseworker thanked Claire for her cooperation, said the investigation would be resolved within 10 business days, and left. Claire closed the door. She locked it. She pressed her back against the wood, Elliot squirming against her chest, and she sank to the floor. The sobbing that followed was not the quiet, dignified kind that people nod sympathetically at. It was ugly and loud and total, the kind that makes the whole body tremble, the kind that sounds like something being torn apart from the inside. Marcia found her there 20 minutes later, having come upstairs from the first floor with a bag of groceries. She set the bag down, lowered herself to the floor beside Claire, and held her without saying a word. For a long time, the only sounds in the apartment were Elliot's soft breathing and Claire's gradually slowing sobs. Finally, Marcia spoke, her voice carrying a hardness that Claire had never heard before. A hardness that belonged not to a neighbor, but to a woman who had spent 30 years in a courtroom watching people lie. Someone made that call deliberately. Someone who knew your unlisted address. Someone who wanted to hurt you. Claire did not need to ask who. She already knew. Sienna Marlowe was not content to take Nathan. She wanted to destroy Claire entirely, and filing a false CPS report was exactly the kind of calculated, deniable cruelty that a woman like Sienna specialized in. The third catastrophe struck Warren Blake, and through him struck Claire in a place she had not thought to protect. Sienna had not stopped at the CPS report. She had also contacted a gossip columnist at the New York Ledger, feeding a story designed to discredit both Claire and the one person who had been helping her. The headline appeared on a Tuesday. Donovan wife already shacked up with doctor, affair may have started before separation. The article included a photograph of Warren entering Claire's apartment building in Queens, a photo taken by a professional photographer Sienna had hired to follow him. The angle was deliberately misleading. Shot from below, Warren looking over his shoulder as if checking whether he was being watched. An innocent visit reframed as evidence of guilt. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Warren's hospital opened an internal ethics review. His supervisor called him into an office and asked the question directly. "Were you involved with this patient while providing care?" Warren denied it, truthfully, but truth does not always survive the atmosphere of suspicion. Hospital administrators, like all bureaucrats, care more about liability than justice, and an ethics complaint, even an unfounded one, leaves a stain that does not wash out. Then Rebecca saw the article. Rebecca, Warren's girlfriend of 2 years, the woman he lived with, the woman who had watched him rush out at odd hours and take phone calls he did not explain and come home distracted and emotional for weeks. She confronted him that evening. "Is this true? Were you sleeping with her?" "No, I was helping a friend who was in a domestic violence situation. She needed medical support, and I was the only person she trusted. And you did not think to tell me?" Warren had no answer for that, because the honest answer was complicated. He had not told Rebecca because the situation with Claire was something he could not easily explain. Something that existed in the gray area between professional duty and personal loyalty, between the debt he owed a woman who had saved him as a teenager and the boundaries he was supposed to maintain as a physician. Rebecca packed a bag that night. She did not scream. She did not throw things. She simply looked at him with the tired expression of a woman who had suspected something was wrong for weeks and was relieved that she finally had a reason to stop pretending. "I cannot do this," she said. "I cannot be with someone who hides things from me, even if the things he is hiding are not what I thought." She left. Warren sat alone in their apartment, staring at the space where her coat used to hang on the rack by the door. He called Claire the next morning. His voice was strained in a way she had never heard before. The voice of a man who had been holding too much for too long and was starting to feel the weight. "I am being investigated at work," he said. "Rebecca left. The article is everywhere. I need you to know something, Claire. I do not regret helping you. Not for 1 second. But I also need to be honest with you. This is costing me everything." Claire listened, and as she listened, a thought began to form in her mind, a thought that was familiar and corrosive and deeply, dangerously seductive. "Everyone who helps me gets destroyed. I am poison. I am the problem. Nathan was right. I ruin everything I touch." She recognized the thought. She recognized it the way a recovering addict recognizes a craving, not as truth, but as a pattern, a voice that had been trained into her by years of living with a man who made her believe that her very existence was a burden. But recognizing a pattern and resisting it are two different things. And on that night, sitting alone in the dark with Elliot sleeping, and the walls closing in, and every ally under attack, resisting felt almost impossible. Midnight. The Queen's apartment was dark, except for the faint blue glow of the baby monitor on the kitchen counter. Elliot slept in his crib, the soft rhythm of his breathing the only sound in the apartment. Outside, the city murmured its constant low hum, sirens and traffic, and the distant bass of music from a bar several blocks away. Claire sat on the edge of the couch in the dark, her phone in her hands, the screen casting pale light across her face. She had been sitting there for over an hour, not moving, barely breathing, caught in the grip of a thought that felt less like thinking and more like drowning. She opened Nathan's contact. His name, his number, the photo she had never changed, the two of them at a restaurant on their second anniversary, his arm around her, both of them laughing. A relic from a time when she still believed the man in the photo was real. Her thumb hovered over the call button. The logic was devastating in its simplicity. If she went back, the CPS investigation would go away. Nathan's attorney would withdraw the custody motion. Warren's life would return to normal. Marcia would stop putting herself at risk. The whole ugly, exhausting, terrifying machinery of fighting back would grind to a halt, and Claire could return to the life she knew, the cage she understood, the silence that at least had the mercy of being familiar. She started typing a message. "I am sorry. I will come home. Please just—" She stopped, read what she had written, read it again. Please just what? Please just stop hurting me? Please just pretend that Christmas night never happened? Please just let me be invisible again, because being invisible is easier than being afraid." Her fingers trembled over the keyboard. The cursor blinked at the end of the unfinished sentence. J'ai the distance, patient and terrible, waiting for her to choose. And then Elliot cried. Not a real cry, just a whimper, a brief sound of a baby adjusting in his sleep, shifting his weight, curling tighter around whatever dreamless warmth kept him peaceful. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but those 2 seconds were enough. Claire looked at the crib across the room, at the small bundle wrapped in the blanket she had knitted, at the tiny fists curled on either side of his face, fingers closed tight, holding onto something invisible. She thought about what Elliot would learn if she went back, that love means surrender, that a woman's place is wherever a man decides it should be, that silence is the price of safety, that the person who hits you is allowed to keep you because keeping is what marriage means. She thought about the boy Elliot would become if he watched his mother accept a life of fear and performance and slow, steady erasure. And she deleted the message, letter by letter, watching each character disappear from the screen, feeling the weight of each deletion like a stone being lifted from her chest. She deleted Nathan's name. She deleted the apology she did not owe. She deleted the word please. which she had used so many times in this marriage that it had lost all meaning. Then she picked up the phone and called Diana Castillo. It was 12:30 in the morning. Diana answered on the fourth ring, her voice rough with sleep, but alert within seconds. "Claire? What happened?" "I need you to go nuclear," Claire said. "Whatever it takes. Whatever it costs. He does not get to win this." There was a pause. Then Diana's voice came through the phone with a warmth Claire had not heard from her before. "Now you sound like someone who is going to win." The counterattack began the next morning. Diana's forensic accountant, Patricia, had continued digging through Nathan's financial records even after the initial discovery of hidden accounts. What she found next was not just a divorce issue, it was a criminal one. Nathan had been inflating expense reports at Steele and Kessler Capital for approximately 18 months. The method was elegant in its simplicity. He submitted reimbursement claims for client dinners, travel, and entertainment that either never occurred or were wildly exaggerated. The money, roughly $230,000 over a year and a half, was funneled into a personal brokerage account Nathan had opened under a slightly modified version of his Social Security number. It was not just marital fraud, it was embezzlement, corporate theft from his own employer. Diana presented the evidence to Graham Steele directly, requesting a meeting at Steele and Kessler's Park Avenue office. She arrived with Patricia and a folder of documentation so thoroughly organized that Graham's own legal team, brought in to verify the findings, confirmed the accuracy within 2 hours. Graham's reaction was not dramatic. He did not raise his voice or slam his fist on the desk. He simply reviewed the evidence with the cold, methodical attention of a man who had built a financial empire on the principle that numbers do not lie. "How long?" he asked. "At least 18 months, Diana replied. "Approximately $230,000. Graham closed the folder. His expression did not change, but his voice dropped to the register that anyone who had worked for him for more than a year recognized as dangerous. "Thank you, Ms. Castillo. I will handle the corporate side." Marcia moved next. With 30 years of family court connections, Marcia knew exactly how the CPS system worked, its strengths, its vulnerabilities, and the ways it could be manipulated by people with bad intentions. She contacted the supervisor overseeing Claire's case, not to interfere, not to pressure, but to provide context that the original report had deliberately omitted. She submitted a sworn affidavit documenting Nathan's history of controlling behavior, the hospital assault, the protective order, and the timeline showing that the anonymous CPS report was filed within days of Claire obtaining legal protection. The implication was clear. The report was retaliatory. Someone was using the child welfare system as a weapon against a domestic violence survivor. The CPS supervisor reviewed everything. The investigation was closed within a week, finding unsubstantiated, no evidence of neglect or danger to the child. Marcia hand-delivered the closure letter to Claire on a Friday afternoon. She placed it on the kitchen table, smoothed it flat, and said 2 words, "One wall down." Claire picked up the letter and read it 3 times. Each reading loosened something inside her, a knot of terror she had been carrying since the caseworker's knock on her door. "One wall down," she repeated. "Several more to go," Marcia said, "but we are building momentum." Warren faced his own reckoning. He submitted to the hospital ethics review voluntarily, providing every piece of documentation that supported his account. A complete timeline of his contact with Claire. Proof that she was never his formal patient during the events in question. She had been treated by the emergency department team. Warren had responded as a personal acquaintance, not as her physician. Character statements from colleagues who could attest to his professionalism. The review board cleared him after 2 weeks. No ethical violation, no disciplinary action. But the damage to his personal life was permanent and ongoing. Rebecca did not return. His reputation at the hospital, while officially intact, carried the invisible bruise of having been investigated. Colleagues were polite but distant. The easy camaraderie he had enjoyed in the emergency department was replaced by a careful formality that hurt more than outright hostility would have. Warren did not disappear. He showed up at Claire's next music therapy planning meeting, a Saturday morning session at a borrowed classroom in Queens. He arrived carrying coffee and looking like a man who had not slept well in 2 weeks, which was accurate. Claire saw him walk in and felt a complicated swell of emotions: gratitude, guilt, admiration, and a kind of aching respect for someone who had paid a real price for standing beside her and kept standing anyway. "You did not have to come," she said, "after everything that happened." Warren set the coffee on the table and sat down across from her. He looked tired. His eyes had the slightly unfocused quality of sustained exhaustion, and there was a tension in his jaw that had not been there a month ago. "I told you I would be here," he said. "That has not changed." He did not say it with romance or grand gesture. He said it with the bone-deep stubbornness of a person who had decided something and refused to be moved. And Claire, who had spent years with a man who kept promises the way some people keep expired coupons, barely and only when convenient, recognized the difference. Warren was not helping her because she was a project or a debt he owed. He was helping her because he had chosen to, and he was willing to pay for that choice with his relationship, with his professional standing, with the comfortable life he had built before Claire's crisis pulled him in. "Thank you," she said. The words felt insufficient, but they were the truest ones she had. Warren nodded. "You are welcome. Now, are we going to design this curriculum, or are we going to keep being emotional about it?" Claire almost smiled. Almost. The muscles in her face had nearly forgotten how, but they twitched in the right direction, and that was enough for now. The corner office of Steele and Kessler Capital occupied a position on the 42nd floor that allowed its occupant to look down on most of Manhattan. Graham Steele had sat behind that desk for 23 years, building a firm that managed $14 billion in assets and employed over 400 people. He had survived market crashes, regulatory investigations, and the kind of internal politics that would have destroyed a lesser man. He had never in all those years been stolen from. When Nathan arrived for the meeting, he did not know what was coming. His assistant, a nervous young woman named Jenna, who had been avoiding eye contact with him for days, simply told him that Graham wanted to see him in the corner office at 9 sharp. Nathan dressed carefully that morning, his sharpest charcoal suit, his best tie. He understood on some level that his world was closing in, that the affair, the divorce, the tabloid headlines, and the protective order were converging into a storm he could not outrun, but he believed, with the unshakable confidence of a man who has been getting away with things his whole life, that he could still talk his way through. He walked into the office at 9:03. Graham sat behind the desk. The evidence folder lay open between them. Dates, amounts, account numbers, transfer records, expense reports cross-referenced with hotel and restaurant records that showed no corresponding reservations. Nathan looked at the folder and felt the floor dissolve beneath his feet. "Sit down," Graham said. Nathan sat. "I built this firm on one principle," Graham began, his voice quiet, which was how you knew he was at his most dangerous. "The principle that our word is our value. When a client trusts us with their money, they are trusting our integrity. When I give someone a position in this company, I am trusting theirs." He tapped the folder. "You inflated expense reports for 18 months. You diverted approximately $230,000 of company funds into a personal brokerage account. You used a modified version of your social security number to open that account, which tells me this was not a mistake. It was a plan. Nathan opened his mouth. Graham, I can explain. The numbers are being misrepresented. My expenses were legitimate. The accountant who compiled this report is working for my wife's attorney, and she has every reason to. Nathan? Graham's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Stop. Nathan stopped. I gave you a career. I gave you a second chance after your personal life became a tabloid headline. I promoted you when other partners wanted you out, and you stole from me. That is not what happened. The board's forensic team confirmed the findings this morning. Independent of your wife's attorney, independent of anyone outside this building, the numbers are accurate. Silence. The kind of silence that fills a room when there is nothing left to say and everyone present knows it. Graham leaned forward. You are terminated. Effective immediately. Our legal team will contact you about restitution. If the board decides to involve prosecutors, and I expect they will, you will hear from them as well. Nathan sat in the chair, paralyzed. The charcoal suit that was supposed to be his armor suddenly felt like a costume, the disguise of a man who had been playing a part so long he forgot it was not real. Graham, please. I have given this company everything. Graham looked at him with an expression that was not anger or disappointment or contempt. It was something worse. It was the expression of a man who has lost respect for someone and knows he will never get it back. No, Nathan. You gave this company a performance, and the show is over. Nathan stood. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else. He walked out of the office without collecting his personal belongings, without saying goodbye to Jenna or his colleagues, or anyone else who had watched his rise and would now watch his fall. He walked through the glass doors of Steele and Kessler Capital for the last time, and Park Avenue stretched ahead of him, the same street he had walked with such hunger and ambition and certainty for years, now feeling like a corridor with no exit. He stood on the sidewalk. The holiday decorations had been taken down. The trees were bare. The sky was the flat, gray color of January in New York, and the cold felt personal, as if the city itself had decided he did not deserve warmth. He called Sienna. She did not answer. He texted her. They fired me. I need to talk. Sienna's reply came 3 hours later. 3 hours during which Nathan sat in his apartment, staring at the walls, waiting for the one person he believed still wanted him. I know. I heard. Also, you should know. I have been seeing someone else for a while. Good luck, Nathan. You are going to need it. Nathan read the message, read it again, set the phone face down on the coffee table, in the same spot where Claire had left the earring and the letter. The woman he had destroyed his marriage for, the woman he had believed chose him above all others, had never chosen him at all. She had used him for access, for status, for the stepping stones his career provided. And now that his career was rubble, she stepped over him without looking back. The symmetry was perfect and devastating. Nathan had used Claire. Sienna had used Nathan. Each of them had treated another human being as a means to an end, and each of them, in turn, had been discarded when they were no longer useful. Nathan sat alone in the apartment, the expensive apartment on the Upper East Side, with its marble and chrome and floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything gleamed, everything was perfectly placed, and everything was empty. He looked at the Cartier box on the coffee table, one earring inside, its twin gone. He looked at the letter, still sitting where Claire had placed it. He read the last line one more time. I will not raise our son in a home where his mother is invisible. I hope one day you become the man you pretend to be. Nathan closed his eyes and in the silence of the apartment that had once represented everything he wanted, he felt the thing he had spent his entire life outrunning: the truth. In the weeks that followed, everything Claire had fought for began to fall into place. The CPS case was closed. The protective order was made permanent. Nathan, now fired, financially exposed, and facing potential criminal charges for embezzlement, was in no position to sustain a custody battle. Bradley Cross, his expensive attorney, withdrew from the case when Nathan could no longer pay his fees. Diana negotiated the divorce settlement with the efficiency of a surgeon. Claire received the old Brooklyn apartment, the one from their first years together, not the Upper East Side penthouse she wanted nothing of. She received full custody of Elliot, monthly child support, and alimony. She did not receive an apology. She did not expect one. Claire officially accepted the creative director position for the music therapy program and began building the curriculum from Marcia's kitchen table, Elliot and a bouncer beside her, research papers and children's songbooks spread across every available surface. One afternoon, alone in the apartment, she sat down at a small electronic keyboard that Warren had found secondhand and placed in the living room without asking. She had not played piano in over a year. Her fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant. Then she played. Not a performance, not a recital piece, just music, flowing out of her fingers with the natural ease of a language she had never actually forgotten, only been forbidden from speaking. The notes filled the small apartment, drifting down the hallway, seeping through the walls. Marcia, who had been walking past Claire's door on her way downstairs, stopped. She stood in the hallway, eyes closed, and listened. A slow smile spread across her face. Claire played for 20 minutes. When she stopped, her eyes were wet, but her hands were steady. She was coming back. Nathan Donovan was not finished. That was the truth Claire should have expected, but allowed herself, briefly, dangerously, to forget. After losing his job, his mistress, and his financial standing in the span of 2 weeks, Nathan spiraled. The apartment on the Upper East Side, which he could no longer afford, became a tomb of takeout containers and empty bourbon bottles. He stopped shaving. He stopped returning calls from his remaining acquaintances. He stopped caring about the image he had spent his entire adult life constructing, because the image was gone and there was nothing underneath it. All that remained was rage, and rage in a man who has lost everything except his sense of entitlement is the most dangerous fuel there is. He hired a private investigator, not one of the expensive, discreet ones his former colleagues used for corporate matters. A cheap one, the kind who works out of a cluttered office above a dry cleaner and asks no questions about why a man subject to a protective order wants to find the woman he is legally prohibited from contacting. The investigator tracked Marcia's gray Toyota, followed it to Queens, noted the address. It took less than a week. The evening it happened, Claire was alone. Marcia had gone to the grocery store. Warren was at the hospital, covering a colleague's overnight shift. Elliot was in his crib, drowsy after a feeding, his small body heavy with the contentment of a baby who had been warm and full and held by someone who loved him. Claire was in the kitchen, washing the few dishes that had accumulated during the day, listening to a podcast about early childhood development, and occasionally humming along to the music that played between segments. The knock came at 7:32. Not a knock. A pounding. The kind of sound that travels through the door and into the bones. The kind that makes the body react before the mind has a chance to process what is happening. Claire, open the door. I know you are in there. Claire, Nathan's voice. But not the version of Nathan's voice she had known for 5 years, not the polished, controlled instrument he used to charm clients and dismiss his wife. This voice was raw, slurred, fractured. The voice of a man who had been drinking for hours and was running on the fumes of a fury he could no longer contain. Claire's body went cold. Her hands, still wet from the sink, began to shake. She turned off the water, set the dish down silently, looked toward Elliot's crib. He had startled at the noise, his eyes wide, but he had not yet begun to cry. "I just want to talk," Nathan shouted through the door. "You owe me that. You took my son from me. You destroyed my career. You destroyed everything." Claire's phone was on the kitchen counter, 5 steps away. She moved toward it, her bare feet silent on the linoleum floor. Nathan pounded again. "Open the door, Claire. Open the damn door." She reached the phone, unlocked it with trembling hands, dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? "My name is Claire Ellison. There is a man at my door. I have an order of protection against him. He is trying to get in. I have a baby. Ma'am, what is your address?" Claire gave it. The dispatcher's voice remained calm, professional, the rehearsed steadiness of a person who handles emergencies the way other people handle paperwork. "Officers are being dispatched to your location. Can you stay on the line?" "Yes." But Nathan was not waiting for the police. The old door, the cheap door of a building that existed off the radar and therefore did not invest in reinforced locks, buckled under his second kick. On the third, the lock gave way entirely, and the door swung open, slamming against the interior wall. Nathan stood in the doorway. He looked nothing like the man who had once strode through glass towers on Park Avenue with the confidence of someone who believed the world was built for him. His hair was matted. His eyes were hollow, ringed with the dark circles of sleepless nights and sustained alcohol use. He wore a suit, the last expensive one he owned, but it was wrinkled and stained, the shirt untucked, the tie missing. He smelled like bourbon and sweat and the particular sour odor of a man who has stopped caring about himself because there is no one left to care for. He saw Claire standing by the kitchen counter, the phone pressed to her ear, her back straight, her eyes locked on his. He saw Elliot in the crib, small and alert and watching everything with the wide, unblinking gaze of a baby who does not yet understand fear. "Give me my son," Nathan said. His voice cracked between command and plea, caught somewhere in the no man's land between authority he still believed he possessed and a desperation he could no longer hide. Claire lowered the phone but did not hang up. The dispatcher's voice continued, tiny and distant, from the speaker. "You are violating a protective order," Claire said. Her voice came out steady, steadier than she felt, steadier than she had any right to be. "The police are already on their way. I do not care about the order. I do not care about the lawyers. I do not care about any of it. I care about my family. You did not care about your family on Christmas night. You did not care when I was in the hospital. You did not care when you hit me in front of our son." Nathan flinched. Not a large flinch. A small contraction around his eyes, a tightening of the muscles in his jaw. The involuntary response of a man who has been confronted with a truth he cannot rewrite. "That was not me," he said. "I was not myself. You pushed me to that point. If you had just listened, if you had not run away with my child." "No." The word stopped him, not its volume. Claire did not raise her voice. It was the quality of the sound, the utter finality of it, as if the word were not a response, but a verdict. "You do not get to rewrite this story anymore, Nathan. Not to me, not to a judge, not to yourself, not ever again." He stepped forward. Claire did not step back. "If you touch me or my son, I will testify in open court about every single thing you have done, every lie, every hidden account, every night you left me alone. The slap in the hospital, the affair, The woman you told that our baby was a mistake? All of it. Your name will be in every paper in this city, not as the man who lost his wife, as the man who deserved to lose her." Nathan stopped moving, not because of the threat, although the threat was real and specific and devastating. He stopped because of her eyes. There was no fear in them. He looked for it the way he always looked for it, because fear was the currency he had traded in for years, the subtle power that kept Claire compliant and invisible and small. But the fear was gone, replaced by something he did not recognize, something steady and quiet and absolutely immovable. Claire was beyond his reach, not physically, emotionally, psychologically, permanently. She had crossed a line that he could not pull her back from, not with charm, not with threats, not with the desperate, pathetic remnants of whatever they had once called love. In the distance, sirens, getting closer. Nathan's shoulders dropped. The rage that had carried him here, that had fueled the bourbon and the private investigator and the kicked-in door, drained out of him like water from a broken glass. What remained was something worse than anger. It was the bewildered, childlike grief of a man who had finally, irreversibly, understood that the thing he lost was the only thing that mattered, and he lost it because of who he chose to be. He looked at Claire, he looked at Elliot, he opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then he turned and walked out the broken door. Police arrived 4 minutes later. They found Nathan 2 blocks away, walking aimlessly down the sidewalk in the cold, his hands in his pockets, his head down. He did not resist. He did not argue. He simply allowed them to place the handcuffs on his wrists with the passive compliance of a man who has run out of moves. Charge: violation of a protective order, criminal trespass. He was photographed at the precinct, and the image, Nathan Donovan, in handcuffs, hollow-eyed and broken, would appear in the next day's paper. The reckoning came for Sienna Marlowe on a Tuesday. Diana's investigator had been methodical, patient, and very good at his job. He traced the anonymous CPS report to a burner phone, purchased with a credit card linked to Sienna's personal assistant. He connected the photographer who took Warren's picture to Sienna's PR firm through a petty cash account that someone had been careless enough not to disguise properly. Diana presented the evidence to the Manhattan District Attorney with the same crisp efficiency she brought to everything. Sienna was charged with filing a false report with Child Protective Services, which in New York carried a potential sentence of up to 1 year in jail. She was also charged with criminal harassment and defamation. The arrest was almost poetic. It happened at her office, during a presentation to executives from a luxury fashion brand she had been courting for months. 2 detectives entered the conference room, identified themselves, and asked Sienna to step outside. She walked out past the reception desk, where junior staff used to lower their voices when she passed. Past the glass walls that had once made her feel powerful, past the colleagues who watched with the horrified fascination of people witnessing a controlled demolition. Her mugshot leaked online before the end of the day. The same tabloids that had published her fabricated stories about Claire now printed her face above a single word: charged. Nathan saw the news from his empty apartment. He could have felt vindicated. Sienna had used him, manipulated him, and was now paying for it. But vindication requires a sense of justice, and Nathan, sitting alone in the wreckage of his choices, felt only a deep, consuming hollowness. Sienna's arrest did not give him back his career. It did not give him back his wife. It did not give him back the son, growing up in another borough with a mother who had learned to live without him. It gave him nothing except the confirmation of something he had always suspected, but refused to admit. He had never been special. He had just been useful. And when he stopped being useful, the world moved on without him. 3 months later, spring in Manhattan. The River Cafe sat at the edge of Brooklyn, its dining room cantilevered over the East River with a view of the Manhattan skyline that made first-time visitors stop and stare. Tonight, the restaurant had been transformed for the city's annual education and philanthropy gala, a glittering event that drew CEOs, investors, educators, journalists, and city officials to celebrate initiatives that would shape the next generation. Graham Steele co-hosted. His involvement lent the event the weight of corporate legitimacy and the kind of quiet power that made people listen when he spoke. The event's centerpiece was the launch of a new citywide music therapy initiative for public elementary schools, and the woman chosen to present the program was Claire Ellison. She entered through the main doors, not a side entrance, not a service corridor. The main doors, where photographers stood and guests lingered, and the whole world could see her walk in. She wore a simple navy dress, bought with money from her first paycheck as creative director. Not designer, not borrowed. Hers. On her ears, she wore earrings that a local jeweler in Queens had fashioned from the silver of her mother's locket, the one keepsake from the woman who gave her life and then disappeared from it. Small, delicate drops of silver that caught the light and held it gently. She had chosen these over diamonds. She had chosen memory over luxury. Graham introduced the initiative from the podium, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had shaped markets and was now turning his attention to classrooms. Then he introduced Claire. The woman who designed this program did so from a kitchen table in Queens, with a newborn beside her and a belief that music can reach the children the rest of the system has forgotten. Please welcome Claire Ellison. Claire walked to the podium. The ballroom was full. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished floors. Faces looked up at her, hundreds of them, some curious, some polite, some genuinely interested. Her hands trembled on the notes she had prepared. She had rewritten the speech 11 times, not to make it perfect, but to make it true. She began. 3 years ago, I stopped playing piano. I stopped because someone told me my music did not fit his space. Not our home, his space. And I believed him. I believed him because when you live with someone who rewrites reality, you stop trusting your own ears. You stop hearing the music. You stop believing it was ever there. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when a large group of people simultaneously decides to listen instead of perform. 6 months ago, I started playing again. In a small apartment in Queens, with a baby sleeping beside me, and nothing to prove to anyone. I sat down at a second-hand keyboard, and I put my fingers on the keys, and I was terrified. Terrified that the music would be gone, that the years of silence had killed it. She paused, looked out at the audience, took a breath. It was not gone. It had been there the whole time, waiting for me to remember that it belonged to me, that no one had the right to take it away. She spoke for 7 minutes, about music therapy, about children who communicate through rhythm what they cannot say in words, about the science of sound and healing, and the simple, radical act of giving a child permission to be heard. She did not mention Nathan by name. She did not describe the affair, or the texts, or the slap in the hospital room. She did not perform victimhood or invite pity. She simply stood at the podium and let the audience see what she had become, not despite what happened to her, but because of the choices she made afterward. When she finished, the room was silent for 2 full seconds, and then the applause came, standing, genuine, earned. Warren watched from the 3rd row. He did not rush to the stage. He did not claim proximity or credit. He simply clapped, steady and proud, like someone watching a person become who they were always meant to be. Marcia, seated beside him, dabbed her eyes with a napkin and pretended she was not crying. She was not fooling anyone. Nathan's story ended not with a dramatic confrontation or a courtroom collapse, but with a quiet, permanent diminishment. He pleaded guilty to the protective order violation. The judge, a woman with decades of experience and no patience for men who confused control with love, sentenced him to 18 months of probation, mandatory anger management counseling, and a permanent criminal record that would follow him through every future background check, every job application, every relationship he might attempt. Graham Steele's legal team negotiated a restitution agreement for the embezzled funds. Nathan would repay the full amount over 5 years, which saved him from criminal prosecution, but ensured that his financial future was chained to the consequences of his past. He could not afford the Upper East Side apartment. He could not find work in New York finance. His name, once associated with ambition and potential, now appeared in search results alongside words like "bud scandal" and domestic violence, and terminated for cause. He moved back to Ohio, not to the town where he grew up, but close enough that the geography felt like a confession. He rented a small apartment with carpet that was slightly too thin, and walls that were slightly too close, and a kitchen with a coffee maker that dripped if you did not hold the pot at exactly the right angle. He got a job at a regional consulting firm. Entry level. No corner office. No Park Avenue view. No one who recognized his name or cared about his ambitions. One evening, late in the spring, Nathan sat alone at his kitchen table, smaller than any table he had owned since college, and opened his phone. He scrolled to the only photo he had of Elliot, taken the day the baby was born, before the texts, before the slap, before everything collapsed. Elliot's face was scrunched and red, his fists balled tight, his expression the universal outrage of a newborn adjusting to the shock of existence. Nathan stared at the photo for a long time. He did not cry. He did not call Claire. He did not draft a letter or compose an apology or make any of the gestures that television and movies suggest redeemed men are supposed to make. He simply sat with it, the weight of what he had chosen and what it had cost. Nathan Donovan would not be redeemed in this story. He would not experience a dramatic awakening or a tearful reconciliation. He would live with the truth, which, for a man who spent his entire adult life constructing lies, was the harshest sentence any judge could impose. Sienna took a plea deal, community service, a fine, a public record that would surface every time a potential employer searched her name. Her career in luxury public relations was finished. No firm with a reputation to protect would risk associating with a woman charged with filing false CPS reports and harassing a domestic violence survivor. She moved to a mid-tier agency in New Jersey, managing social media accounts for a chain of car dealerships. The work was tedious, unglamorous, and invisible, everything Sienna had spent her life running from. She never apologized to Claire. Claire never expected her to. Some people do not possess the architecture for remorse, and recognizing that is its own kind of freedom. A Saturday morning, 6 months after the gala, Brooklyn. Claire sat at a piano in her own apartment, a modest 2-bedroom with hardwood floors that creaked in places and morning sunlight that poured through tall windows and pooled on the carpet like warm water. There was a small garden visible from the kitchen window, tended by the woman who lived downstairs, a retired schoolteacher who grew tomatoes in summer and left baskets of them on Claire's doorstep with notes that said things like, "For the baby's mama." Claire had bought the apartment with the divorce settlement. Not because it was impressive, because it was hers. Every crack in the ceiling, every stubborn window that stuck in the humidity, every floorboard that groaned under her weight, belonged to her and her son and no one else. Elliot sat in a high chair nearby, 9 months old now, babbling at a stuffed rabbit with the single-minded intensity of a baby who believed that conversation with inanimate objects was both normal and deeply important. The apartment smelled like coffee and banana bread. Marcia's recipe, which Claire had attempted 7 times before getting right, and which Elliot had contributed to by grabbing a banana from the counter and mashing it directly into his own hair. Claire played. Not a performance, not a rehearsal for anything, just music, flowing from her fingers the way water flows downhill, following a path that had always existed but had been blocked for years. She played a piece she had written herself during those first weeks in Queens, a melody that began in a minor key, tentative and uncertain, then gradually shifted into something warmer, fuller, a chord progression that resolved not into triumph, but into peace. A knock at the door. She knew who it was before she opened it. The knock was Warren's. 2 knuckles, unhurried, patient. He stood in the hallway holding 2 cups of coffee and a paperback novel tucked under his arm. It was a ritual they had developed over the past few months, an exchange. He lent her books. She lent him vinyl records. They discussed them during the planning meetings for the music therapy program, conversations that started professional and drifted into personal and never felt forced or dangerous. Warren did not walk in like he owned the space. He paused at the threshold, the way he always did, and waited for Claire to nod. She nodded. He sat beside her on the piano bench, set the coffee on the small table she kept nearby for exactly this purpose. He did not say anything profound. He did not need to. Claire reached for the small wooden box on top of the piano. She opened it. Inside lay 2 earrings, the single diamond from Nathan's Cartier pair, the one she had taken the night she left the Upper East Side apartment. She had kept it not as a memento of love, but as evidence. Evidence that she had once lived inside a lie and had found the courage to walk out of it. And the small silver earring drop, fashioned from her mother's locket by the jeweler in Queens. Simple, delicate, warm to the touch, the way old silver gets when it has been held often. Claire put them both on. She turned toward the window, where her reflection appeared faintly in the glass, superimposed over the Brooklyn skyline and the spring morning light. 1 earring from the life she survived, 1 from the life she came from. Together, they framed the face of the woman she had chosen to become, not Nathan's wife, not Sienna's victim, not a statistic in a domestic violence report, not a case file in family court, not a woman defined by the worst things that happened to her. Just Claire, Warren noticed. You are wearing both. Claire nodded. One reminds me where I have been, the other reminds me who I am. She turned back to the piano, played a few more bars of the piece she had written. The melody moved through the apartment, drifting down the hallway, out the cracked window, into the Brooklyn morning. Elliot laughed at something invisible. The sound was pure and round, and completely unconcerned with anything that had happened before this moment. Warren leaned back, coffee in hand, listening. Claire Ellison did not need a fortune to save her. She did not need a man to rescue her. She did not need revenge to feel whole. She needed something far simpler and far harder to find. The courage to walk out a door she had been standing in front of for years. And on a quiet Saturday morning in Brooklyn, with sunlight on the quays and her son's laughter filling the room, and a man beside her who had earned the right to stay by proving again and again that he would not leave, Claire finally understood the truth she had been circling since Christmas night. She had always been enough. Not because someone told her so, not because a court ruled in her favor, not because the man who broke her was punished and the woman who tormented her was exposed. Those things mattered. Justice mattered. But they were not the source of her worth. She was enough because she had walked out of a burning building carrying nothing but her child and her refusal to disappear. She was enough because she had stood in a hospital room with a handprint on her cheek and said, "Get out." She was enough because she had sat in the dark at midnight, typed an apology she did not owe to a man who did not deserve one, and deleted it letter by letter. She was enough because she chose herself. And choosing yourself, when every voice around you and inside you is telling you to stay small, is the bravest thing a person can do. She was never the woman Nathan tried to make her. She was never the shadow Sienna tried to erase. She was never the frightened girl in foster care who believed she did not deserve a family. She was Claire, just Claire, and that was more than enough. More than the piano played on. Elliot babbled. Warren drank his coffee and smiled at something he did not say out loud. The morning light moved slowly across the floor, stretching toward the hallway, warming every surface it touched. Outside, Brooklyn was waking up. Traffic humming. Birds on the fire escape. The woman downstairs watering her garden. A kid on a bicycle ringing his bell as he passed. Ordinary life. The kind Claire once looked down on because Nathan taught her to. The kind she now understood was the most extraordinary gift there is. She closed her eyes. She breathed in. She played one final chord, a major seventh, open and unresolved. The kind of chord that does not end a song, but promises that the song will continue. And it did. It continued. The music, the morning, the life she had built from nothing, it all continued. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.